You ever watch a man die in front of you, not on television, not in some movie where they cue the sad music, but right there close enough that you can smell his last breath? That's how my story begins. My name is Abigail Tyrone, 58 years old, Atlanta-born, and made of scars that tell more truth than history books ever could. Before I tell you what I saw that night, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are? Midnight? Noon? Maybe dawn creeping through your blinds. Wherever you sit, understand this. I am not spinning fiction. This is my life, my truth. And it's a story some folks might not survive if they had lived it. That night, the storm was restless, and so was I. Thunder rattled the chandeliers in my Buckhead home, shaking the glass like a warning. The walls carried echoes of rain against stone, a rhythm that should have soothed me. But something gnawed at my chest. Maybe instinct. Maybe God. I left my study, pacing the hall with slippers brushing polished wood, and drifted toward the guest wing, toward Nadia's quarters. Nadia was my daughter-in-law, my Leon's wife, and in those days, I still called her my own child. Leon was in Chicago on business, working his contracts. The house was quieter without him, though not empty. My husband, Harlan, was home. My second husband, the man who had carried me through 2 decades, who once held my hand in church pews and called me his queen. I thought he was asleep. I thought I was heading toward Nadia's room, just to check, just to be sure she was resting. But fate has a way of redirecting footsteps. As I turned the corner, laughter brushed the air, muffled, but sharp, like it had no business hiding. It was coming from behind my own bedroom door. My pulse drummed in my ears, fast and unsteady. I pressed my hand against the knob, cool brass under trembling fingers, and I pushed. The sight before me will follow me into my grave. Harlan's body leaned against mine, but not in marriage, in betrayal. He lay tangled in sheets with Nadia, my son's wife. The lamplight traced sweat on their skin. Her hair fanned across my pillows. His lips curved into a smirk as though he'd won something. And when Nadia turned to me, she didn't flinch. No shame, no apology, only a predator's grin. "Keep it a secret, old woman, or you die," she hissed, her voice low, cutting through the storm outside. I looked straight at her, my chest rising, but my face didn't crack. I'd cried too many tears in my lifetime to gift them now. Silence can cut sharper than any scream, and I knew it. So I replied, calm as the rain, "We'll see about that." Then I closed the door. The air in the hall grew heavy, pressing on me, but I kept walking. I didn't crumble. I didn't shout. I moved with the quiet weight of someone who had buried a husband before, who had buried innocence long ago. My slippers whispered against the hardwood as if they, too, carried the secret. My heart hammered. My ears still rang with thunder. My body wanted to collapse, but my spirit stood. That was the difference between me and them. Back in the solitude of my study, I sank into the leather chair, staring at walls lined with photos of family dinners, graduations, Sunday mornings. I saw Leon's smile framed in glass. I saw Harlan's hand on my waist at a fundraiser. And I saw the empty space between those images, the gap where truth lived. I pressed my palm against my chest, steadying myself. Betrayal, I learned long ago, doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes with the soft creak of a bed you once thought was sacred. I whispered into the storm outside, though no one heard, Lord, give me strength, because tonight my war has begun. I didn't yet know the shape of that war, didn't yet know the poison Nadia kept in her arsenal, the kind that wouldn't stain a coroner's report. Didn't yet know that my husband's smirk was not the end of his treachery, only the beginning of mine. What I did know was this: they thought silence made me powerless. But silence is a weapon, and I wield it well. I would let them think I was broken. I would let them laugh in my bed. Because when a woman like me decides to fight, she doesn't swing wild. She waits. She listens. She learns. And she strikes when no one sees her coming. But I didn't know then whose shadow was laughing in the dark. The sound of laughter behind my bedroom door still echoes in me. It was a laugh too bold for shadows, too reckless for a house that bore my name. That night was the night everything shifted, but to understand the depth of that betrayal, you need to know who I was before the storm. I was born on the back roads of Georgia, in a shack where the red dirt clung to our shoes like a curse. Mama worked double shifts at a diner, frying bacon until her hands blistered, while Daddy drifted in and out with the seasons. I learned early that if I wanted more, I had to build it with my own hands. And I did. By the time I hit my 30s, I had scraped and clawed my way into Atlanta real estate. My company, Tyrone Properties, started with one foreclosure I bought at an auction for pennies and sold at a profit big enough to light the fire. From there, it grew: apartment complexes, retail spaces, land deals. Each signature on a contract was another brick in the empire I promised my son, Leon, he would inherit. My home was not just walls and marble. It was family dinners on Sundays, collard greens steaming on the table, cornbread passed around, and laughter that rolled louder than the thunder I'd one day hear in betrayal. We prayed before we ate, and I always reminded Leon, what we have is God's grace. Don't you ever forget where you came from. Leon never did. My boy was my pride. Smart, driven, always reaching higher. I saw myself in him, the same hunger for more, the same refusal to bow to hardship. And when he brought Nadia home for the first time, I thought I was witnessing the start of another blessing. Nadia had beauty that turned heads, yes, but more than that, she had poise. She knew how to hold herself at the table, how to speak just enough but never too much. She carried an air of refinement that made me think, this girl will stand by my son, not just beside him. I embraced her, arms wide, heart open, called her daughter from the start. Maybe that was my flaw, trusting too quick, loving too deep. I remember the celebration night, clear as day. We had just closed on a new commercial property off Peachtree, a crown jewel deal that would anchor Tyrone Properties for decades. The conference room smelled of ink and leather as I signed the last page. Cameras flashed, champagne bottles popped. That evening, my home was full of people, business partners, old church friends, neighbors. Laughter filled every corner. Gospel, music hummed low from the speakers. Leon stood tall at my side, his arm around Nadia, his face glowing with pride. "Look at Mama," he said, raising his glass. From backroads dirt to Atlanta marble, Tyrone Properties is forever. Everyone cheered. I couldn't hold back the tears. I walked over to Nadia, clasped her hands in mine, and said, "Baby, you're family now. Whatever is mine is yours." She smiled, polite, beautiful, but her eyes were elsewhere, distant, watchful. as if she was cataloging the room, the faces, the wealth. I told myself it was nerves, that maybe she wasn't used to so much attention. I smoothed her hair and thought no more of it. That was the night I should have seen it, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the way she stood not in awe but in calculation. But I was blinded by pride, by love, by the need to believe my son had chosen a good woman. If I had paused, if I had listened to that whisper in my gut, maybe I would have stopped what came next. But pride deafens even the wisest among us. So I celebrated. I trusted. I laughed with my guests, while Nadia's stare carved its place into the corners of my memory. It was only later, on that stormy night when I heard laughter behind my bedroom door, that her eyes, that distant look, came rushing back to me, and I realized the empire I had built wasn't the fortress I thought. It was a feast laid out for a wolf I had welcomed into my home. For 3 days, I didn't leave my bedroom. Curtains drawn tight, light kept out, as if darkness could stitch back the pieces of a woman torn open. I lay across silk sheets that mocked me, drenched them with tears until even the pillows seemed heavy with sorrow. Every clock tick in that house rang like a hammer, and each hour asked the same question. Why? I had known loss before. When Clarence, my baby brother, died in that car accident, I swore no grief could ever hollow me like that again. I had sat in that church pew, veil pulled low, hands trembling as the choir sang him home. And afterward, when everyone left, I made myself a promise. I would never again let life bend me until I broke. I had kept that vow for decades. But betrayal has a sound unlike death. It creaks like a door half open. It whispers like laughter in your own house. That sound was what nearly destroyed me. On the 4th day, something shifted. My body was weak, my eyes swollen, but my mind had sharpened like glass. Grief had burned away the softness in me, leaving only resolve. Nadia thought she had caged me in silence with her threat. What she didn't know was that silence is where I do my best work. So I began digging. At first, it was whispers. An old friend of mine from church mentioned she'd seen Nadia before, years back under another name. I didn't press her then, but I carried it with me. I searched county court records late at night, combing through lawsuits, civil disputes, inheritance filings, and like a rot beneath polished wood, a pattern emerged. Nadia wasn't just Nadia. She was Nadine in Florida, a caretaker who'd walked away rich after an elderly widower's sudden passing. She was Naomi in Tennessee, briefly married to a man 30 years older who died before the honeymoon was over, death listed as natural causes. She was even listed as Natalie in North Carolina, her name tied to the estate of a retired judge whose fortune shifted mysteriously after his untimely fall down the stairs. Each name, each place carried the same echoes. Older men, sudden deaths, swift inheritance, lawsuits settled in quiet, a predator dressed in silk and perfume. I thought my heart had already been shattered, but the true break came when I found proof of her schemes tied to my own husband. It started with a discrepancy in Tyrone Properties accounts. A property deal that should have netted 7 figures was short by nearly half. I went line by line, signature by signature, and there it was, documents co-signed by Harlan and Nadia. Loans drawn against my holdings, funds rerouted, payments lost. The money didn't vanish. It had been siphoned, laundered through shell accounts tied back to Nadia's aliases. It wasn't just betrayal of the flesh. It was theft of everything I had built with my bare hands. My empire, my son's inheritance, my legacy, and Harlan, my husband of 30 years, had signed his name beside hers. I couldn't breathe when I saw it, not because I hadn't suspected his weakness. I knew Harlan loved the chase of beauty, the taste of vanity, but because of the smile I remembered on his face that night I caught them. It wasn't shame. It wasn't guilt. It was allegiance. He had chosen her over me, over Leon, over everything we had. 3 nights later, I stood over Harlan's grave, the earth still raw, the roses still wet from strangers' hands. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind through the oaks. I pressed my palm against the headstone, stone cold and unyielding, just like the man beneath it. You chose her over me, I whispered, my voice steady now, stripped of tears. But you don't get the last word. I leaned closer, my lips nearly brushing the carved letters. Now, I'll bury you both. Not in the ground, not in silence. I'll bury you alive. The night air carried my words away, but I knew the shadows heard me. And from that moment, there was no turning back. The night Leon returned from Chicago, I staged a dinner worthy of a celebration. Not because I felt festive, but because I needed the stage set, the lights dimmed, the actors in place. A family dinner. That was the one thing Nadia could never resist playing her role in. The dining room glowed under the chandelier, its crystals scattering soft light over china that had belonged to my grandmother. Candles flickered between silverware polished to a shine, and the scent of roast chicken laced the air with false comfort. I had cooked it myself, ritual more than necessity. Some people pray before war. I cook. When they entered, Leon hugged me hard, pressing his lips against my cheek, his warmth filling me with a reminder of why I endured. He slipped into his seat, tired from travel, yet smiling, unaware of the storm circling just inches away. Nadia followed, draped in silk the color of spilled wine, her face painted with devotion. She greeted me with the same smile she wore the night she threatened me. And Harlan, my husband, my betrayer, walked in last, adjusting his tie like this was just another evening. I noticed the quick glance he shared with Nadia, brief but sharp. They thought the stage belonged to them. I poured the drinks myself. Red wine for Nadia, the same for me. Bourbon for Harlan, heavy on the rocks, just how he liked it. When I set the glasses down, I caught it, the faint scrape of glass against table, subtle but deliberate. I excused myself, claiming I'd forgotten the appetizers. In the kitchen, I paused. My hands gripped the counter as I steadied my breath. Something inside me said check. When I returned, my eyes locked instantly on my glass. The rim glistened with a chalky film, so fine, most wouldn't have noticed. But I had spent years catching fraudulent signatures and smudged ink on deeds. My eyes were trained to see what others missed. She had poisoned my drink. I didn't hesitate. With a fluid gesture, as natural as straightening a napkin, I slid my glass toward Harlan and switched it with his bourbon. He barely noticed, too busy launching into a story about some business dinner, while Leon laughed, oblivious. I lifted the glass Nadia had prepared for me and sipped, my eyes never leaving hers. She sipped hers too, all grace and feigned innocence. But behind her painted eyes, there was a calculation, a watchfulness. She was waiting. Minutes passed. Leon told us about the skyscrapers in Chicago, about new projects and possibilities. Nadia touched his hand, her voice syrup-sweet, her laughter chiming like it belonged to another life. I nodded, played along, even chuckled, but my heart wasn't in the room. It was waiting for the crash. And then it came. Harlan's words faltered. His hand clutched his chest, his face twisted in agony. The bourbon glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. He gasped once, twice, and then collapsed. "Call an ambulance." Nadia screamed, her voice sharp, practiced, as though she had rehearsed this panic 100 times. Leon leapt from his chair, fumbling for his phone, shouting at dispatch, his face stricken with fear. He cradled Harlan's head, begging him to hold on. I sat still, my fork untouched on the plate, watching the scene unfold like a play I already knew the ending to. Sirens arrived minutes later, paramedics rushing in, voices overlapping, but nothing could be done. Within the hour, Harlan Tyrone was declared dead. The autopsy followed 2 days later. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. No trace of poison. The arsenic Nadia used mimicked death too perfectly. The case was closed before it ever opened. At the funeral, Leon clung to Nadia's hand, comforting her while she wept into his shoulder, her grief a mask she wore better than most actresses. Friends, neighbors, business partners, everyone mourned the loyal husband, the upstanding man. No one saw the truth. No one but me. That night, back in my room, I unlocked the hidden panel beneath my floorboards. Inside, a safe held the growing collection of files, photographs, bank transfers, every scrap of evidence I had gathered. I added Harlan's forged documents to the pile, each one a nail in Nadia's coffin. As the lock clicked shut, I whispered into the quiet, "Round one was mine, but the war was just beginning." And in that silence, I knew she would strike again. Atlanta has a way of moving on even when your world stops. By the time the second Sunday after Harlan's funeral came, the choir was already singing brighter songs, the ushers greeting worshipers with their usual warmth. I wore my black dress still, veil pinned back, face composed into the kind of sorrow people expect from a widow. I hugged hands, accepted casseroles, nodded at condolences. On the outside, I was still the grieving wife. Inside, I was sharpening my blade. After service, I slipped into a quiet corner of the fellowship hall with an old friend, Sister Marlene. She wasn't just a church mother. She had worked the city clerk's office for nearly 30 years and knew where every file was buried, sealed, or not. When I told her I needed access to a few civil case records, she didn't ask why. She just pressed her hand over mine and whispered, "Send me the names." That was the way our generation moved. Silence, trust, loyalty. Later that evening, I called someone else. Not family, not a friend, but the investigator I'd used years ago when a developer tried to swindle me out of a block of foreclosures. He wasn't flashy, just meticulous, the kind of man who never raised suspicion because he blended into the background. "I need you again," I told him. There was no hesitation. Within a week, documents began to trickle in. Lawsuits filed under Nadia's other names, settlements closed with non-disclosure agreements, estates contested and drained until nothing was left but ashes. Each file was like peeling wallpaper off a rotting wall. Beneath the surface, everything was decay. But the biggest revelation came through bank records. Offshore transfers, accounts tied to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, amounts so large they made my chest tighten. And then the knife twisted deeper. She wasn't just bleeding me dry through Harlan. She was draining Leon too. Quiet withdrawals from his business account, masked as vendor payments. My son, who still slept beside her at night, had no idea she was hollowing him out. The night I saw the proof, I sat alone in my study with the papers spread before me, my reading lamp casting gold across the damning numbers. I wanted to march down the hall, drag Leon from their bedroom, shake him until his eyes opened. But I didn't. Rage doesn't win wars, precision does. I gathered the files, slid them into a folder, and carried them upstairs. Beneath the rug in my room, I lifted the floorboard and fed the papers into the safe where all the other evidence lay waiting. My arsenal was growing. When I met with the investigator again in the parking lot of a half-empty diner off Cascade, he handed me another folder, then looked at me in a way that made my skin prickle. "Be careful, Abby," he said, voice low enough to be drowned by passing traffic. I frowned. Careful of what? "They're watching you too." I froze, fingers tightening around the folder. The words clung to me long after I drove away, the city lights blurring through my windshield. It wasn't just me keeping tabs on Nadia anymore. She had eyes, and now they were fixed on me. Some wars start with gunfire. Mine began with a letter slipped under a locked office door. I typed it myself on an old laptop I kept in the back of my closet, careful not to leave fingerprints of who I was. The words were sharp, precise, stripped of emotion. Check Nadia Williams' business filings. False vendors. False addresses. Start with Tyrone Properties joint accounts. I sealed it in an envelope, no return address, no signature, and mailed it to the city attorney's office from a postbox 2 neighborhoods over. By the time I dropped it through the slot, my heart was steady as stone. 2 weeks later, I got my first taste of victory. Nadia received a letter stamped with the city's seal, summoning her for questioning about irregularities in her business dealings. I watched her open it at the breakfast table, Leon pouring coffee beside her. Her hand trembled just slightly before she caught herself, plastering on a mask of confusion. "What is this?" she gasped, eyes wide, voice trembling with well-practiced innocence. "They're accusing me of fraud." Leon's brow furrowed. He snatched the letter, reading it quickly, then wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "This is ridiculous. Somebody's targeting you. We'll get a lawyer, babe." I sipped my tea, slow and silent, letting the steam hide the curve of my mouth. Nadia may have fooled my son with her tears, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the calculation, the rage. She knew exactly who had lit the match, even if she couldn't prove it. The next few days, I kept my mask on. I played the doting mother, the grieving widow, the strong businesswoman in boardrooms. But beneath the surface, I was alive with purpose. The city attorney's summons wasn't enough to topple her, but it rattled her cage. And when a predator rattles, they make mistakes. Only Nadia didn't stumble. She adapted. She walked into that office dressed in cream silk, Bible clutched in her hand, crocodile tears flowing as she spoke about being a young black woman unfairly targeted. She invoked Leon's name, our family's reputation, even Harlan's memory. By the time she left, she had turned suspicion into sympathy. Leon called me that night, voice heated. "Mama, someone's coming after Nadia. I don't know who, but I won't let them destroy her." I swallowed my fury, whispering a prayer instead. My son was tangled deeper than I thought. Every strike I made against her only wrapped him tighter in her web. That evening, after dinner, I carried a stack of files back into my study. The house was quiet, Nadia humming faintly down the hall, Leon laughing at something on television. My chest ached with the weight of betrayal, but I told myself patience was my ally. It was close to midnight when I decided to run an errand. I slipped my keys from the bowl by the door, grabbed my purse, and walked to the driveway. The night air was cool, the cicadas buzzing loud in the trees. I slid into the driver's seat of my Mercedes, clicked the belt, and turned the key. The moment I pressed the brake, something felt wrong. Too soft, too loose. Instinct tightened my throat. I stepped out, crouched down, and touched the wheel well. My fingers came back black with grease and metal dust. The brake lines had been cut. I froze there in the dark, the street lamp flickering above me, the neighborhood silent as a graveyard. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just a chess match anymore. This was war with no rules. I straightened slowly, eyes narrowing toward the glowing windows of my home. Somewhere inside, Nadia was laughing at Leon's jokes, her hands folded neatly on her lap. But I knew better. She wasn't just playing for my company or my son. She was playing for my life. Grief is a cloak, heavy, suffocating, and invisible to those who've never worn it. Nadia knew that, and she wrapped it around me like a noose. It started with whispers. A colleague from my board called one morning, her voice cautious, like she was stepping barefoot on glass. "Abigail, is everything all right? I've been hearing things. Folks saying you've been confused lately, forgetting numbers, snapping at staff." I thanked her, kept my tone calm, and hung up the phone. But my hand shook as I set it down. I hadn't forgotten a single number in the last 40 years. Tyrone Properties existed because my mind was sharp as steel. Yet Nadia's poison wasn't in a glass this time. It was in the air. By the end of the week, 3 more calls came. Partners hesitated on deals. An old church acquaintance mentioned I looked tired and maybe should take some rest. I knew the source before I even traced the threads. Nadia was planting seeds in the soil of my reputation, watering them with lies. The final blow came at my own dinner table. A Saturday evening, the house warm with the scent of rosemary chicken I had prepared myself, one of Leon's favorites from childhood. I had hoped it might draw him closer to me again. He arrived late, Nadia trailing behind him in a silk blouse the color of blood. The meal started politely enough, forks clinking, Leon asking about a property bid in Buckhead. But then Nadia leaned in, voice soft with mock concern. "Leon, did you know your mama misplaced an entire folder of contracts last week? I found them shoved in a kitchen drawer. I think maybe she's just overwhelmed." My fork froze midair. "That's a lie," I said flatly. Nadia gasped, hand to her chest, playing the wounded daughter-in-law. "I didn't mean anything by it. Mama Abby, I'm just worried about you." Leon looked between us, eyes narrowing. "Mama, is that true? Have you been forgetting things?" The question sliced deeper than any knife. "No, Leon, she's twisting things. You know me better than that." But Nadia pressed on, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "I just don't want her to push herself too hard. After Daddy, after everything, grief can—" Enough. My voice cracked through the dining room, loud and raw. "You dare sit at my table and lie in my face? You think I don't see what you're doing?" The silence that followed was a vacuum. Leon's jaw tightened. And then he turned, not to her, but to me. "Mama, stop." His voice was firm, public, final. "Nadia's trying. She's been holding this family together while you've been slipping. Please, just accept her help." The room spun. My son, the boy I had carried, raised, fought for, siding with her against me. I swallowed the bile, rising in my throat, dropped my fork onto the plate, and forced myself into silence. Nadia rested her hand on his, her lips trembling as though she, too, was a victim. And Leon, my Leon, let her. After they left, I cleaned the table alone. The plates clattered too loud in the sink, my hands too tight on the porcelain. I whispered to myself, "Hold steady, Abby. Don't let her win." Later that night, I passed their room on the way to mine. Their door was half closed, light spilling into the hall. I meant to keep walking, but then I heard her voice, low, sharp, stripped of all the sugar she fed Leon. "She won't last the year," Nadia hissed into the phone. A pause, then a cold laugh. "Once she's out of the way, everything falls right into place." My blood iced over. I pressed a hand to my chest to steady the pounding, then eased away from the door before I could hear more. The war had turned. Nadia wasn't satisfied with stealing Leon's loyalty or my company. She wanted me gone permanently, and now I knew it for certain. When the world turns against you, you either curl up and wait for mercy, or you stand in the ashes and remind the fire who started it. I had been here before, not in this exact battlefield, but close enough to recognize the terrain. When Clarence died all those years ago, folks whispered that I wouldn't last, that a widowed woman with a young son couldn't possibly hold on to land, let alone build an empire. But I survived. I carried Leon on my hip, signed contracts with one hand, and buried my tears where no one could see them. This wasn't my first war. It just felt personal in a way bullets and bankruptcy never did. For 3 days after overhearing Nadia's venomous whisper through that bedroom door, I went silent. I canceled meetings, ignored calls, cooked for myself in a house that had grown too quiet. I walked Buckhead streets at dawn, my hands clasped behind my back like an old general surveying ruins. And as the sun hit the polished windows of my properties, I whispered to myself, "You didn't build this just to watch her steal it." When I was ready, I called the one man who hadn't failed me yet, Marcus Hale, my investigator. We met at a quiet diner off Auburn Avenue, the kind of place where nobody cared who you were if you paid in cash. Marcus slid into the booth across from me, his trench coat dripping rain onto the vinyl seat. "You look tired, Abby," he said, voice low. "I'm tired of being underestimated." I replied. He cracked a half smile. "Good, because I've been digging, and our girl Nadia, she's messier than she lets on." I leaned forward, ignoring the clatter of plates around us. "Tell me." He unfolded a thin folder. Inside were copies of documents, fake test results, hospital records stamped with fraudulent dates. Couple years back, she was with a man named Harold Denton. Older, wealthy, sickly. Guess what kept him hooked? Nadia told everyone she was nursing him through a terminal condition. Except these records. He tapped the page. All fake. She faked his diagnosis, even staged doctor visits. By the time Harold's family caught on, he'd signed over half his estate. And Harold... My voice was steady, but I gripped the folder like a weapon. Dead. Officially a stroke. But if you ask me, she walked away richer and cleaner than she should have. The walls of the diner seemed to close in around me. First Harlan, now Harold. It wasn't love Nadia chased. It was leverage. Her weapon of choice wasn't just poison in a glass. It was isolation. Separate the man from his people, whisper doubts until he trusts no one but her, then drain him dry. I thought of Leon, my boy, already slipping through her fingers, already looking at me like a stranger. And suddenly the storm cleared in my head. She always isolates them first. I murmured, half to myself. She cut Harold off from his kin. She tried to paint me as unstable to Leon. She's playing the same hand again. Marcus frowned. What are you thinking, Abby? I closed the folder and slid it back to him. My voice came out calm, colder than I felt. If isolation is her weapon, then I'll turn it back on her. She wants me alone. I leaned back, eyes narrowing as the plan began to take shape. Then I'll be the one to isolate her. Marcus raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth twitching like he wanted to warn me, but knew better. He'd seen the steel in me before. Then I'll keep digging, he said finally. We parted ways in the rain. I walked to my car without an umbrella, letting the drops wash over my face. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't choking on grief or rage. I was breathing strategy. The war wasn't just survival anymore. It was chess. And Nadia was about to learn she wasn't the only player who knew how to cut off her opponent's lifeline. Grief is a chain, but once it snaps, what's left is sharper than steel. I had worn my mourning like shackles, 3 days of tears, then weeks of doubt. But by the time the autumn wind rattled my Buckhead windows, I wasn't the same woman who once sat trembling in her kitchen. I wasn't just surviving Nadia anymore. I was hunting her. The plan came to me late one night as I stared at the soft glow of my desk lamp. Stacks of property deeds and bank statements spread across my mahogany desk like a battlefield map. Nadia had a pattern. She sniffed out wealth like a bloodhound, then went straight for it, wrapping her lies tight until her victims handed her everything. So I decided to give her something to sniff. I drafted documents that looked legitimate enough to fool even a trained auditor. A mock trust account in Leon's name, quietly overlooked when his father passed. The pages hinted at millions tucked away offshore, accessible only through coded instructions. I took my time, aging the paper, stamping it with seals I'd collected over decades of property deals. One look, and Nadia would believe she'd uncovered Leon's inheritance secret. I didn't stop there. I tucked the folder into my office safe just beneath legitimate files and made sure Nadia would know where to look. I even left the safe slightly ajar after a staged, careless evening, as though grief had made me sloppy. In truth, nothing about it was careless. Every detail was bait. The transformation in me was almost frightening. I had been the woman betrayed, humiliated, discarded. Now, I was deliberate, calculating, cold. Clarence had once told me after a brutal deal in Macon, Abby, a hunter doesn't roar before the kill. She waits. That memory burned through me as I set the trap. 2 days later, I caught her scent. Nadia had always masked her curiosity with charm, but I noticed the way her fingers lingered too long on the safe handle when she thought no one was watching. I heard the faintest shuffle of papers in my study while I pretended to nap on the couch. By nightfall, I knew she had taken the bait. Marcus, my investigator, helped me set the second half of the snare. He arranged for a shadow email account, discreet, untraceable, that sent Nadia a single message from an anonymous contact. It read, "I know about Leon's trust. You don't have to wait for his permission. I can help you access it. We didn't need her to reply. We just needed her to try." Marcus explained that once she attempted to breach financial systems tied to Leon's name, it would constitute wire fraud, enough to pull her into a legal spotlight she couldn't sweet-talk her way out of. That night, I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat by the window listening to the city hum beneath me. For the first time since catching Nadia in my bed with Harlan, I felt the power shift. She thought she was circling me like a predator, but the ground under her feet was already cracking. Still, I couldn't let triumph blind me. Leon remained a delicate thread in all this. He believed in her, defended her. If the trap worked, it would wound him too. But I told myself what I told him as a child when he skinned his knee on the church steps. Sometimes pain is the only way to learn. As midnight neared, a small smile crept across my lips. My phone buzzed with a single alert from Marcus. She opened the email. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights reflecting in the glass before me. Round 1 had been survival. Round 2 was deception. Now came the big play, the move that would reveal who Nadia really was, not just to me, but to the world. The hunt was no longer in secret. The first line had been drawn, and she had stepped squarely into it. The thing about pulling strings is you don't always know what else is tied to the knot. I thought I had Nadia cornered with my false trust account, thought her greed would trap her neatly in wire fraud. But when Marcus called me one gray Atlanta morning, his voice low and uneven, I realized I had underestimated just how deep her claws went. "Abby," he said, "it's not just her. The shell companies Harlan built, they don't stop with him. Some of the documents are stamped with Leon's signature." My chest tightened. That's impossible. Leon wouldn't. Not knowingly, Marcus cut in, but his name is there. It looks like he's been signing off on deals for years. Someone forged him, or worse, tricked him into signing papers he never read. I sat at my desk staring at the framed photo of Leon at his Morehouse graduation, cap tilted back, smile wide enough to fill the room. My son had always trusted too easily, trusted Nadia, trusted Harlan, trusted the shiny promises they wrapped their lies in. And now that trust had given them the keys to everything I had built, the air in my office felt suffocating. I pulled open the locked drawer where I kept copies of deeds and contracts, flipping through until I found the recent notarizations. There it was, Leon's handwriting, clean and neat, next to documents tied to Harlan's shadow accounts. My vision blurred, rage and grief colliding until I almost tore the page in half. This wasn't just Nadia circling me anymore. She had turned my son into her shield. I had to move fast. If Nadia caught wind that I'd uncovered Leon's unwitting involvement, she'd bury the evidence before I could expose her. I called Marcus again, voice steady despite the storm inside me. "We need every record tied to Leon's name. Bank wires, tax filings, offshore entries. If she's using him as cover, I need proof before she destroys it." The next 48 hours were a blur of motion. Marcus, and I combed through file after file, sometimes meeting in the dim back room of an old church office, sometimes huddling in my car with printouts spread across the dashboard. Each page added weight to my heart. Transactions from Caribbean banks, shell companies routed through Delaware, signatures that weren't Leon's but were close enough to pass. Nadia had orchestrated the perfect fraud, draping herself in my son's trust like a veil. One night, close to midnight, I slipped back into my house and nearly froze at the sound of Nadia's voice drifting from the kitchen. She was on the phone, low and urgent. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she whispered. "Leon signs whatever I put in front of him. The old woman's nosy, but she won't last the year." I pressed myself against the wall, pulse hammering. She wasn't just draining Leon, she was planning for my disappearance too. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Clarence's words in my head, the way he used to warn me when Leon was little. "Our boy's got a soft heart. Abby, don't let the wrong people twist it." And here it was decades later, twisted right in front of me. By morning, I made my decision. I gathered the files Marcus and I had pulled together and locked them in my safe, layering them between legitimate deeds so no one would suspect. But Nadia was sharp, sharper than Harlan ever was. If she sensed I was onto her, she'd torch everything. Every step I took in that house from then on felt like a chase through shadows, me trying to stay one breath ahead of her trying to erase the tracks that tied Leon to her schemes. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about saving my son's name, his future, his very soul from being devoured by the woman he thought he loved. That evening, as I stood at Harlan's grave, the autumn wind stirring the leaves around me, I whispered the truth that cut deeper than anything before. My son's loyalty is her sharpest weapon, and if I didn't disarm her soon, it would be the blade that killed us all. Power is loud when it's yours. It hums through contracts signed, buildings raised, your name spoken in council chambers. But when it slips away, the silence is suffocating. The order came down on a Wednesday morning. I was at my office, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, when Marcus rushed in holding a folded envelope. The court stamp on the front made my stomach sink before I even opened it. Inside, a temporary injunction. Nadia had filed claims of mismanagement and financial instability, alleging that I was unfit to oversee Tyrone Properties in my state of grief. The judge, one who owed favors in the right places, granted her request. A freeze on several of our accounts. My accounts, the lifeblood of my company, choked at the root. By noon, the news cycle chewed it up and spat it out. Headlines flickered across Atlanta screens. Widow under scrutiny, Tyrone Properties facing legal questions. The whispers grew louder. Abigail Tyrone, unraveling. Abigail Tyrone, paranoid. A once great woman slipping into madness. Nadia knew exactly where to strike. Not my body, not even my heart, but my reputation. And in Atlanta, reputation was currency. I tried to steady myself, but the blows kept coming. That night, Marcus didn't answer my calls. By morning, I learned why. He had been jumped leaving his apartment. 2 masked men, quick and brutal. The hospital called me because my number was the last on his phone. When I arrived, the antiseptic sting of the ER hit me like a wave. Marcus lay pale under harsh fluorescent light, tubes taped to his arms, lips split, one eye swollen shut. The doctor said he'd survive, but his recovery would be long. His words slurred when he tried to talk, but I squeezed his hand and told him not to. His fight was done, for now. Walking out of that hospital, I felt the ground tilt under me. My ally was down. My company was bleeding. My name was being dragged through every newsroom in the city. Nadia had cornered me. And for the first time since this war began, I wondered if I had the strength to keep standing. That evening, I drove to Southview Cemetery. where Clarence had been laid to rest decades ago. The sky was heavy with rain, the kind that lingered before breaking open. I walked past the rows of stone until I found him, his name etched deep, weather-worn but unshaken. I sat down in the wet grass, the cold seeping through my coat, and let my body fold forward. "Clarence," I whispered, voice breaking. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." The words poured out like confession. How tired I was. How heavy the betrayal felt. How lonely it was to fight enemies who wore family's face. I told him about Leon. How blind he was. How I feared losing him entirely. I told him about Nadia's venom. How it spread faster than I could cut it back. And then I went quiet, listening for something that would never come. The storm broke then, rain cascading down, soaking me until my hair clung to my cheeks. I didn't move. For once, I let myself sit in the weakness, the doubt, the unbearable weight of defeat. Rock bottom wasn't just a phrase. It was a graveyard bench. Rain washing over you, no one left to lean on. When I finally rose to leave, the cemetery lights flickered as I passed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A nurse from the hospital. She said Marcus had pressed something into her hand before he slipped into sedation, insisting it be given to me. Back at my kitchen table, I unwrapped the small object from a blood-stained napkin. A flash drive, scuffed and faintly warm from his grip. My fingers trembled as I held it. His last act of loyalty, his last weapon pressed into my hands. And for the first time in days, I felt the faintest flicker of fire inside me. The rain hadn't stopped when I slid the flash drive into my laptop. Water still pattered against the windows, each drop echoing like a countdown clock. My fingers hovered over the keys before I clicked open the files. The screen lit with rows of emails, dates, subjects, attachments. My chest tightened as I scrolled. There it was, correspondence between Nadia and faceless bankers in Zurich, Panama, the Caymans. Offshore transfers linked to shell accounts, identical to the ones Harlan once funneled money through. Wire receipts stamped with forged signatures, Leon's included. Some emails were cold instructions, others smug acknowledgments. Funds received. Proceed as planned. Each click sharpened the picture. Nadia wasn't just a manipulator. She was an orchestrator. And she wasn't done until every dime of Tyrone Properties was in her grasp. I leaned back in my chair, breathing hard. Grief had dragged me under, but this was oxygen. Marcus had bled for this evidence. I wouldn't let his loyalty die with him. For the first time in weeks, I stood straighter. I shed the skin of the grieving widow and slipped back into the woman who once built an empire from crumbling bricks. The Abigail Tyrone who fought off banks that tried to cheat black homeowners, who faced down city councils stacked with men who didn't think a woman like me belonged at the table. That woman wasn't gone. She was just waiting. By dawn, I was making calls. Quiet, strategic, surgical. First was Reverend Carter, an old friend who knew more about the city's political undercurrents than most councilmen. "Abby," he said, voice gravelly with age, "I told you years ago, keep receipts. And now you've got them." He connected me with an attorney he trusted, a woman sharp enough to cut glass. Then came Judge Monroe, a man whose campaign I once funded when no one else believed in him. I reminded him of the checks I wrote, the calls I made on his behalf. He remembered. Favor owed. Favor called. By mid-morning, I had a team, lawyers drafting motions, allies lining up in the shadows, the kind of silent network you build only after decades of surviving wars polite society pretends don't exist. Every string I pulled tightened a noose around Nadia's neck. I could feel the shift inside me. Just weeks ago, I was kneeling in wet grass at Clarence's grave, begging for strength. Now I was the storm. Fear had no place in me anymore, only calculation. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, draped in a charcoal suit. Not morning black, not widow's silk. This was armor. I pinned my mother's brooch to my lapel, a reminder of the woman who scrubbed floors so her daughter could walk on marble. My reflection stared back steady, unflinching. The Abigail who stepped out that door wasn't just a businesswoman or a mother, she was executioner and architect both. As I walked through the halls of the courthouse, the marble floors clicked beneath my heels like a drumbeat. The air smelled of old paper and ambition. Faces turned, whispers rose. But I didn't flinch. My briefcase was heavy with the flash drive and printed files, evidence that would unravel Nadia thread by thread. At the steps leading into the chamber, I paused. My pulse was steady, my voice low enough for only me to hear. Tonight it ends. And with that, I pushed the door open, carrying both the weight of my past and the fire of my vengeance into the light. The courtroom hummed like a live wire. Reporters scribbled in frantic shorthand, their eyes darting between me and Nadia as if waiting for blood to spill. The air carried that sterile tang of varnished wood and old law books, but beneath it, tension pulsed hot enough to choke. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the flash drive now transformed into stacks of exhibits. Beside me, my attorney, sharp-suited, unflinching, organized the files with a surgeon's precision. Across the aisle, Nadia sat in a cream-colored dress, pearls shining at her throat as though innocence could be accessorized. Her expression was a study in fragility, eyes wide, lips trembling, the portrait of a woman persecuted unjustly. And Leon sat between us, not literally, but close enough. His gaze darted from her to me, his hands clasped so tightly I could see his knuckles whiten. My son, the same boy I once taught to ride his bike in the red clay streets of Georgia, was now a man staring down the fracture of his own family. The judge's gavel rapped once. Proceed. My attorney rose. Your Honor, what we present today is not speculation, but documented fraud. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, funds siphoned from Tyrone properties without authorization. The first exhibit flashed on the projector. Wire receipts, dates, amounts. I saw Leon lean forward, brow furrowed as his own signature stared back at him, twisted into a tool he hadn't known Nadia wielded. Gasps rippled through the room. When the emails appeared, Nadia's smug words to bankers abroad. I kept my eyes trained on her. She shifted, barely, her smile faltering before the mask slipped back in place. Then it was her turn. Her attorney, slick as oil, rose with a practiced sigh. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see is the tragic unraveling of a grieving woman's mind. Mrs. Tyrone has suffered unimaginable loss. She has convinced herself of a conspiracy that does not exist. These so-called documents are fabrications, smokescreens born of paranoia. Nadia stood, clutching a tissue like a prop. Leon, she whispered, her voice pitched perfectly to carry across the room. I never wanted this. Your mother, she can't let go of her anger. She's destroying us. I felt my son's eyes on me, searching, questioning. For a moment, the ache in my chest was almost unbearable. Then I remembered the flash of Harlan's smile the night I found him in her arms, the cold venom in Nadia's voice when she hissed, "Keep it a secret, old woman, or you die." I rose slowly, nodding to my attorney, who pressed play on the final exhibit. The speakers crackled. Then came Nadia's voice, sharp, unmistakable. "Keep it a secret, old woman, or you die." The courtroom froze. Reporters stopped mid-scribble, their pens dangling uselessly. Jurors' mouths parted in unison, as though air itself had been stolen. And Leon, my son, stared at Nadia like he was seeing a ghost crawl out of her skin. His lips parted, his voice low but audible in the silence. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. Nadia's mask shattered. The tremble in her hands wasn't rehearsed this time. It was real. She stammered, reaching toward Leon. "Baby, that was taken out of context." But context couldn't save her. Not anymore. The judge's gavel slammed, but the real verdict had already been delivered. Not by the court, but by the look in Leon's eyes. Eyes that no longer belonged to her side of the battlefield. The morning air outside the Fulton County Courthouse carried a strange, quiet, though a crowd had gathered, phones raised, reporters calling out names. Nadia stepped onto the stone steps between two deputies, wrists cuffed, her face stripped of glamour. The pearls were gone, the cream dress replaced by a county-issued jumpsuit. Even the woman who once hissed death threats in my home looked small now, swallowed by her own lies. The cameras clicked like a swarm of locusts. Questions flew, sharp as stones. "Nadia, do you deny the charges? Did you forge the accounts? How long have you been stealing from the Tyrones?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her lips trembled, but no script could save her anymore. The city that once gossiped about my supposed paranoia now feasted on her ruin. Inside, the judge's order had been clear. The accounts of Tyrone properties were unfrozen. My business was free, no longer strangled by her schemes. Decades of my work, my father Clarence's legacy, my sweat and survival, all pried from the grip of a conwoman. It should have felt like triumph. But sitting in that courtroom as the gavel fell, I felt the hollowness first. Because beside me sat my son, shoulders bowed, eyes rimmed red. Leon. He had been silent through most of the proceedings, hands folded, gaze fixed on the table as if afraid to meet my eyes. Only when the deputies dragged Nadia away did he finally turn. His lips trembled, but the words came raw. "Mom, he choked, swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for doubting you." I laid my hand over his. His palm was damp, trembling the way it used to when he was a boy caught in a lie. My son, my pride, the same boy who had run laps around the Sunday churchyard, who once called me his hero. And yet, he had stood on the wrong side of truth, blinded by a woman's touch. His shame weighed heavier than any gavel. "It's over now," I told him softly, though my chest ached. "She played you, same as your father. Don't let it break you." He nodded, but his eyes carried a wound no judge could heal. Trust, once fractured, never mends the same way. That evening, the house was too quiet. The chandelier still rattled faintly when the storm winds rolled through, just as it had the night of betrayal. I walked the hallway alone, every creak of the floorboard reminding me that victory can sometimes sound like emptiness. In my study, The safe sat locked with its neat bundles of evidence. Useless now, but proof of a war survived. I closed it, knowing it wasn't documents that had cost me the most. It was the bond between mother and son, stretched thin by betrayal's shadow. Later, I drove to Southview Cemetery. The earth was damp from the day's rain, the grass clinging to my heels as I approached Clarence's grave. The marble was cool beneath my hand. "They're gone now," I whispered. Her lies, his betrayal, my fight. For a moment, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, as if the past itself was breathing. I pressed my forehead to the stone. "Victory tastes like ash," I murmured, because it did. The empire was mine, the con exposed, the law on my side. Yet the laughter behind my bedroom door, the hissed threat in the dark, the weight of Leon's broken gaze, those would linger far longer than Nadia's name in the headlines. I rose, spine straight, leaving the graveyard with the night pressing heavy against my shoulders. Justice had come, but the cost was carved into me deeper than any wound. The sun rose slow over Buckhead, spilling gold across rooftops that had once stood in shadow. That I walked the familiar streets, the click of my heels steady against the pavement, the air cool and full of morning promise. Where there had once been half-finished lots and whispering neighbors, now children darted between swings and basketball hoops, their laughter ringing through the neighborhood like a hymn of renewal. Tyrone Properties was alive again, not just in paper and accounts, but in the breath of families who trusted my name to shelter them. It was what Clarence would have wanted, what I had fought to protect. But even as the city moved forward, my home carried a different kind of silence. The rooms no longer echoed with arguments or the thick tension of betrayal, just the steady hum of appliances and the faint creak of wood as the house settled each night. Peaceful, some would say. To me, it was a quieter kind of war. Leon still came around. Holidays, birthdays, an occasional dinner when business slowed down. He smiled, hugged me, kissed my cheek the way he always had. But I could feel the scar beneath it all, the doubt, the sting of having chosen her over me. No matter how much truth the courtroom revealed, some wounds between mother and son do not fully close. His laughter came softer now, his visits shorter, and though we were cordial, I knew the gulf would always remain. I didn't press him. A mother learns when to hold on and when to let a man walk his own road. My mornings became ritual, a cup of dark roast on the porch, ledger sheets spread across the table, and the sun cutting through the trees in slices of light. Each page I turned, each deal signed, felt like another nail securing the foundation, Clarence, and I had built. Nadia's shadow no longer lingered over contracts or courtrooms. Her name had faded into the prison logs where it belonged. And yet on certain evenings when the thunder rolled far in the distance, I would hear the echo of that night, chandelier rattling, the door half open, my husband's smile beside another woman's face. Betrayal like that doesn't vanish. It settles into the bones, reshaping the way you breathe. Still, I did not let it define me. Neighbors sometimes stopped me on my walks, their children tugging at their hands. "Ms. Tyrone, you've done so much for this community," they'd say, gratitude plain in their voices. I smiled, nodded, let them believe I was simply a woman of business and steel. They didn't know the whole truth, that beneath the glass towers and manicured lawns, a war had been fought and won in silence. One evening, I returned to Clarence's grave, not in mourning but in acknowledgement. The air smelled of jasmine that night, the moon hanging low. I traced his name with my fingertip, the stone cool as ever, and whispered, "We're still here. The legacy stands." And for the first time in months, I did not feel hollow. The scars remained. Yes. Leon's hesitation, Harlan's betrayal, Nadia's venom. They were etched into me like lines on a map. But they were mine. Proof that I had weathered storms most women would never admit aloud. As the dawn broke the next morning, I stood at the top of my street, the laughter of children rising behind me, the skyline glittering ahead. My story wasn't neat, it wasn't clean, but it was survival. Some scars heal, others stay. But either way, I'm still standing.